It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George, back at Drake University in the offices of the Journalism Department. And Jennifer Konfrst, our friend of podcast by George, the state legislature has just adjourned for the session for the year. We want to talk to her about that and welcome her back to the show and tell us about the session just passed, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate your patience. It was a pretty busy session. I learned a lot my first session. Some things I thought might be the case were, and then some other misconceptions I had about the way people get along and the way things work, just very different than I anticipated. So I really feel like it's a place where there's a lot of potential for good. And I think we could have done better this year, but we also got some things accomplished.
Yeah. I follow you and I follow the legislature as close as I can. Some of it's kind of in the weeds and there's not a lot of entertainment value to it. I got to admit, you got to be a little bit of a wonk and enjoy the process because it is a process. But I noticed with you, was there a little frustration creeping in by the end?
Yeah. I was really frustrated by the procedural moves that were designed to stop us from talking. I get it. Everything's decided before we get on the floor. We all know we're going to lose this vote, right? They're not going to the majority party's not going to bring up a vote unless they have the votes. So we know that. But the least we can do is have a debate about it on the floor where the public can hear it, right? Where we can talk about the benefits and merits and drawbacks to legislation. And I got pretty frustrated toward the end there that we would talk and nobody from the other party would talk except the people who were responsible for the bill. They would introduce it, sit down, wait for the vote, and move on. And that got pretty frustrating because it felt like
you can't compromise if you don't talk.
Exactly.
You can't bipartisan anything if
Nope.
you don't participate.
Nope.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it, too, was there at the end. We were supposed to adjourn May 3rd. They said, well, we're going to adjourn April 27th instead. And we didn't fix Medicaid. And we didn't fix a lot of things.
They adjourned earlier than you thought. Oh, I did not know that. In this day and age.
In this day and age. And then they cut us off at 1 o'clock. They said, we're not going to allow debate after 1 o'clock on Saturday. Well, there were 8 people or 7 people left still wanting to talk. That's not democracy. That's using the rules. I'm not saying it was anti-democratic, but democracy in spirit is supposed to be allowing people to talk and debate and share ideas.
Well, plus, I want my money's worth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stay in there. Hang in there to get this done. Well, okay, so if you're a podcast by George listener, by and large, most of the folks that listen are going to be Democratic leaning at the very least. And, of course, I'm getting more progressive all the time. So for folks of that mindset, what were some of the triumphs? What would you say?
I would say one of the triumphs was the CARE Act, which was a move that was bipartisan that allowed people to caregivers to get instructions and increase communication between hospitals and caregivers. So when someone gets discharged from the hospital, the person who's going to take care of them at home actually now is required to get some information about how to care for them. And that was it was something that AARP had really wanted, and it's something that really helps our caregivers, and it's growing across the country. So it was great to see that done. Logan's Law, which is a bill that allows hunters to put their organ donation status on their hunting license so that kids who maybe aren't driving yet or people who don't have a driver's license can also share their organ donation.
Yeah, now you played a key role in that.
Well, I talked about it because I'm a recipient of a donor cornea. And so I spoke about it on the floor because it's really meaningful to me because of someone else's generosity, I'm able to still see. So I'm very grateful for that. And that was a good law. We passed SAVE, which is the infrastructure funding for schools. Currently there's a penny sales tax in the state that penny goes to infrastructure projects at school, which reduces property taxes because then schools don't have to use property tax money to rebuild the building, right?
Yeah.
And so we extended that sunset so cities or school districts can bond out. That was good. We did some good things. There were some good things there.
Yeah. So you're coming back.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 2-year term.
It's a 2-year term.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so What were some of the most bitter disappointments? What were the things that you were hopeful about that just didn't happen this time?
Some things that didn't happen were, we didn't fund schools appropriately and adequately. So we had proposed we thought fiscally responsible 3% increase in state supplemental aid for K-12 schools. That was not accepted. We did 2.06, which means layoffs, which means bigger classes, which is not good. So we also proposed with Medicaid, there were 46 members of the Iowa House co-sponsored a bill that would have carved out the long-term sort of people who are on long-term care, sort of chronically ill people who are on Medicaid, would have carved those people out and brought them back under state coverage so that they would get their coverage more consistently. It wasn't up to the marketplace. We know they're going to need help for a long time. Let's carve them out and make sure they're getting the care they need first. And that did not pass. That did not even get a subcommittee hearing. I proposed a bill to increase screenings for dyslexia in K-5 schools, and that did not even get a subcommittee hearing. So that was frustrating. And then what was really frustrating to me was what we did. A lot of the things that we did that were disappointing. There was a time when they wanted to add this language to the Constitution of the state of Iowa that says that we have a right to bear arms and that strict scrutiny will be the standard we use.
I've said on the podcast before, I'm like, why would you? This is a country where nobody has ever been denied a gun except a felon.
Yeah.
It would make headline news probably across the country if some law-abiding citizen couldn't obtain one.
Yeah.
That's never been the case. I get on my soapbox with this, but every nut that ever wanted one, going back to John Wilkes Booth, for God's sake, Lee Harvey Oswald, Squeaky Fromm, Chapman, all of these, they all get guns. I mean, there's no inability to obtain a gun in this country. Barack Obama got elected, and they sold millions of them. These homes are bristling with weaponry across the United States, and here in Iowa included, and we're wasting time legislating to make triple, quadruple sure that everybody has an easy path to obtaining a gun, and other things don't get done. So anyway, that's my spiel.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
And one of my things is that we proposed just taking the language from the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and putting it in the Iowa Constitution. Fine. If you want to put the right to bear arms in Iowa's Constitution, fine. Let's just take the language from the federal Constitution and put it in ours and move on. But no, they wanted that strict scrutiny language, which is a higher standard, and it makes it harder to create laws that protect citizens and do sensible gun legislation. So, for instance, background checks could be at risk because with that strict scrutiny language, it's possible that that would be something that would be unconstitutional if this ever made it to the Constitution. So,
really,
yeah, it's in the courts in another state that's doing that right now. So it really is going farther than we need to go.
God, even the NRA wants background checks. I mean, the majority of the NRA, I think 62% favor.
Members do.
Yeah,
not
the members. Yeah, true.
Yeah. So that was disappointing. But also, I was disappointed that the felon voting rights didn't get done. Going back to what you asked, that didn't get done. That was disappointing. That passed the House, I think, unanimously, or there was 1 or 2 votes that were against it. So a very bipartisan support.
That's not the ability to vote while you're in prison. It's the ability to vote after.
Right. Currently, if you're convicted of a felony in the state and you get released, you can no longer vote, ever. And right now there's a process for appealing to the governor one by one, and that this law was going to make it so that you could restore your voting rights after you got out. We're one of only 2 states that still doesn't allow felons to vote. And the governor could still do an executive order and just make it so, but that hasn't happened yet. So then I was disappointed with the changes to our judicial nominating system that politicized our courts, and I was disappointed with the cuts to Planned Parenthood sex ed funding.
Yeah, go figure that one.
Yeah.
I mean, that, again, is just beyond pale. I just can't imagine what you don't want to educate kids about. The argument, I don't understand it. But there was a victory in the birth control, the drug, the pills, the availability, right?
Well, it didn't end up being a victory because it didn't
didn't?
make it through the Senate. Or I don't think it came to the floor of the House, but it did. I did vote for it in committee, and it came out of our committee. But I don't think we ever debated it on the floor. So that's progress, but it didn't get done.
What about the sex ed argument?
So,
I don't get that.
yeah.
They want the parents doing that exclusively?
No.
Or why do they argue against that?
They would argue that there are other organizations that can do this sex ed funding, and then that way Planned Parenthood doesn't get money. And they just don't want Planned Parenthood to get any money. And they say there are other places that do it. And, but the sex ed that Planned Parenthood provides is developmentally appropriate. It's medically accurate. It is all kinds of sex ed, and it is proven to work. I mean, there are counties in the state where only Planned Parenthood does the sex ed. And in those counties, each one of them has seen a double-digit decrease in teen pregnancies.
Yeah, I know that's on the decline, which is surprising. It's great.
Well, it's education.
Yeah.
So taking those out will lead to more unplanned pregnancies, period. So it just really doesn't make any sense. It's counterproductive, frankly. It was very frustrating. And then, of course, the denial of gender affirmation surgery coverage for transgender Iowans who are on Medicaid. That was just mean-spirited. There's no purpose for that. And it wasn't even as part of the real, like the bill. It wasn't a standalone bill. They did that a lot. There were a few things they squeezed in at the end as part of another bill just to get it done. And I think that's tricky. I don't think that's a good way to do things.
Yeah. Well, more frustrations perhaps than triumphs, and it makes sense. You're a Democrat and you're in a Republican-controlled legislature, so I get that. That's kind of the wrap-up on the year in the State House. You know, and I follow you on Facebook and on Twitter and places like that, but you're also extremely busy moving around doing work with constituents and listening posts and that stuff outside the State House. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, I think it's really important, and that's one of the benefits of being from the area is that even during session, we can go back and listen to constituents and talk with them and hear what they're concerned about. But I think it's really important to maintain an active presence in the district after session too. So, you know, I've been trying to go and talk with constituents when I can and meet with people and do all kinds of fun stuff there and really hear from people. But, you know, frankly, we've got a lot of people right now who are concerned because of Medicaid and their United Healthcare leaving the state and the questions that brings to people who have Medicaid. So I'm talking with a lot of constituents who have Medicaid concerns.
Yeah, and I've talked about that on the podcast before, Medicaid. That issue, I mean, I'm kind of one of those shame on you, but then after that shame on me thing, I look at that Medicaid issue. It is exactly what it was described to be. The problems that that they're having right now, that was predicted. It was projected. And if I'm an observer of this and I'm trying to weigh who's right and who's wrong, I'm looking at this and saying, man, I'm going with these people because that's just exactly what they said would happen, and that is exactly what's happening.
And we aren't the one. I mean, I'm not the one suffering, really. It's right. Iowa's most vulnerable people who are suffering, who don't have time to go through this rigmarole just to change again.
Yeah, and that's I saw that in the paper too, and nobody talks about that. I mean, I barely understand this stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't want to fill out all those forms and do all that, and I'm not the one that's suffering. And if you if you're a caretaker, if you're suffering from one of these maladies and you're depending upon, that's the last thing you want to be screwing with over and over and over again because the state just can't get it right. What do you think's going to happen with that private Medicaid? Is that going to continue, or is that going to finally collapse on itself?
Well, our governor and our Speaker of the House both said Medicaid is here to stay, or privatized Medicaid is here to stay. I don't think it is, because I think eventually, I mean, the idea of providing health care for people who can't afford it is not to make a profit, right? It's not to make money. And so bringing in for-profit companies is going to, by design, reduce care because that care is expensive. And so for me, it doesn't make any sense to privatize this when it was working, and now we know it doesn't work. And so that's why we proposed several times, several different ways to not even overhaul it, because that's going to be the problem, George, is that we're going to get the majority, hopefully, in 2020, and we're going to want to just fix it. And you can't just put the toothpaste back in the tube that easily because of the nightmare path they've taken us down. So it's going to take incremental steps. And that's why we're proposing those incremental steps now, hoping to sort of start to fix things. But there's not even hearing it. And so that's really the frustration, is that they don't have a long-term plan, I don't think. It's clear to me that they don't, because if they did, we wouldn't have companies leaving before their contracts were up.
Yeah. Well, I love getting together with you, and when I think of you as a legislator, it's very interesting to me. It reminds me of my dad, oddly enough. Now, my dad grew up here locally. He was as blue collar as a blue collar can get. I mean, he barely graduated from high school, and I don't think when he was a young man he was a big fan of education. But in his elder years, he got to be that way. He always used to tell me, whatever problem that you want to address, that you want to solve, his number one place to go to was educate him.
That's right.
Educate him. It will solve everything.
Exactly
You'd say, Dad, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he would always come back to that. The problem is a lack of education, a lack of an informed electorate. It's people that just don't know what the hell is going on. That's what he would say.
Well, now the problem becomes that now people are questioning the sources of that education and that information.
Yeah,
anyway.
I know they are. Yeah.
And so as people start to silo themselves, as you well know, where they're getting educated and what they're being educated about may not be
right. And he was talking about public education for that very reason, bringing them into that fold. And so you're a professor at Drake University in the journalism department, and your course is what do you teach?
So I teach public relations, and I teach news writing online, and then I teach in our graduate programs, but I run our strategic political communication program here at Drake.
Yeah.
So that's a new major that's designed to take politics and persuasive communication, put them together, and help create good ethical advocates to go out there and campaign or be lobbyists or do the good work of organizations that need it.
I mean, I'm a big First Amendment rights guy. I'm a big fan of journalism. I did it for a number of years. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. But as I mentioned, I'm becoming more progressive all the time. And I'm kind of critical right now of the journalism, television journalism, cable television journalism, in particular when it comes to this Mueller thing. I'm going to give you my spin on this and tell me where I'm wrong, or tell me as a teacher, if I was one of your students, where you'd say, George, you need to, research this a little further. But I'm looking at this Mueller thing, and from a progressive point of view, and I remember when they decided they were going to have him investigate Donald Trump on the Russian influence in the elections. And I remember it was almost immediately upon his election. And I said to myself, walking by the TV, listening to my wife watch this, Russia? Really? They're going to connect Trump with Russia? That doesn't sound like that's going to work. I said, that dog won't hunt. That plow won't scour. They got to come up with something better than Russia. They've been trying to connect things with Russia since I was a little kid. The Russians are coming. And they never came. I mean, I'm still looking at this Russian influence. Well, okay, so this goes by. And Rachel Maddow has this on every night. And I saw Trump when he won on election night, and his family, and he was the most surprised guy in the room. I don't think Trump ever thought he was going to win. Here's what I think happened. I think in the run-up to the 2016 election, Donald Trump, knowing that he wasn't going to win, wanted to ingratiate himself, wanted to further something that he did want to win or did have a chance of winning. That was the Trump Tower in Russia. I'm not going to win anyway, so I'm going to talk good things about Russia. I'm going to talk about how we're going to get along with those folks and all that. And most people didn't care because he wasn't going to win anyway. But the people that did win or did care, did watch this closely, were the intelligence agencies, the CIA, even the FBI. Their entire foundation is based upon this adversarial relationship between the United States and Russia. They were dialed into it, but he's a big mouth. He's not going to win. Well, the guy wins. And it was because of the Electoral College. It was because of these pockets that Hillary Clinton didn't carry in Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Flipped the election in Trump's favor. He didn't win the popular vote, but he won in the Electoral College. So all of a sudden, the day after he gets elected, up pops this Russian thing. Like, where's this coming from? Well, I'm watching Rachel Maddow, who I thought was great. I've even mentioned to you how big a fan I was of hers. In comes Jim Clapper, James Brennan, these CIA, I call them CIA spooks, these people that I'm not a big fan of. I'm a lefty. I'm a progressive. They're feeding her this information about this Trump thing, and she's running with it. And it's on every night for 2 years, and I'm looking at this, and I don't know. Where's the other side of this story? You can't have another side of the story. Why? Because it's secret stuff. It's only the CIA knows it, and they can only tell you, what they want to tell you. And she's developing these storylines and these conspiracies, and they're telling me, well, this Mueller guy, you can trust him. He's great. He's a Republican, but he's independent, and he's got a sterling track record, and he's an investigator, and when his report comes out, you can really believe what that man has to say. And at the time, I said, this is turning into a long diatribe, but follow me on this. This is the guy that appeared before Congress in 2007 3 or 6 or whatever it was in the run-up to the Iraq War, and told everybody that not only was it his belief that Saddam Hussein had WMDs because he was the head of the FBI at the time, Mueller was, that Hussein would use them domestically here in our country if he wasn't stopped. Of course, completely wrong. No WMDs. The surveillance photos of the trucks moving through Baghdad with the WMDs turned out to be ice cream trucks. Literally. Okay, so this is the guy that's in charge of the Mueller report. So I'm looking at it and saying, what he comes up with, I'm not going to put a lot of veracity in, number one. And number two, he comes up with a report that pretty much, it's still open to question, but pretty much vindicates Donald Trump on Russia. Not obstruction, but he's saying there's nothing here. One final footnote I bring up to people, and I'll bring this up again on the podcast. Richard Engel. You're nodding your head. You're familiar with him. Man, this guy's good. I tell everybody, this guy's got kahunas, boy. Yeah. He's been in every war theater around the world. Outstanding investigative reporter. Yes. He appeared on Rachel Maddow 2 years ago talking about Russiagate. She put him there in front of the microphone. What do you got? He says, Rachel, I've followed this everywhere from the Steele dossier to the Kremlin. I've talked to everybody in between Washington, D.C. I've been to London, Prague, all that kind of stuff. I can't find anything. I cannot connect these dots. I can't help you with this. Thank you, Richard. He was off the show.
Oh, he never came back?
Hasn't been back because he didn't support those theories that she's still spinning on MSNBC. Okay. That's my spiel. Am I wrong in that? What do you think?
Well, in terms of the content, I think that what you're talking about there is framing, and that's what Rachel Maddow's doing, right? Every night she's framing this as a Trump-Russia connection. And by doing that, when the Mueller report finally comes out and there's not one, it looks like he wins. Now, if she had been framing it all along as an obstruction of justice connection, and then the Mueller report doesn't exonerate him of obstruction, then her theory and her frame is true, right? Proven true. So a lot of it is you reap what you sow. And so if she spends 2 years talking about Russia, then and it's not Russia, then the headline, which I saw several places, is no collusion, which is what Trump has been saying from the beginning. That phrase made it into print newspaper headlines when the Mueller report.
I saw when I said, "My God, you just handed Trump the election in 2020."
Well, I don't know about that, but but as far as this issue goes, there's plenty of other things to beat up on Donald Trump about.
Right.
And my argument is, let's make sure that we're diversifying our argument here, and we're making our case for someone and against someone. I don't think it's a binary choice. I don't think you can say we have to talk about what we're for, not who we're against. I think we can do both, and I think we have to.
Well, the people my age that I talk to, and they're political, and they're all about this. What about the young people that you work with in your classes? Are they all up with this?
They just sort of, the ones that I'm talking to, even the Republicans, I think, are not gung-ho on Donald Trump. They're kind of focused on local races or statewide races or, the sort of national congressional races. But overall, I think they kind of just think he's ridiculous and really care about issues more than I would say other generations do. They really care about the environment. They really care about the economy, college debt, because they're seeing their future and they're seeing that they're going to be bogged down by those things.
Yeah, the climate thing in particular. There are climate scientists that are saying 12 years. Well, 12 years if you're their age.
Yeah. Well, right. And the economy and debt. And, when my husband and I were 23, we bought our first house. They can't do that with the amount of debt that they have, not because they've done anything differently than we did, but because cost of college, cost of debt has gone up so much they can't keep up.
That's great. Well, we got a couple of hats that you get to wear here. So this question isn't for you as a state legislator. It's for you as a journalism professor. Do you follow WikiLeaks? Are you dialed into that controversy?
A little, just periphery, yep, on the side.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, it is.
Here's my take on it. And again, it's on the progressive side. WikiLeaks reminds me a lot of the Pentagon Papers. I don't see a lot of difference there. Ellsberg basically stole those things, took them to the Washington Post and the New York Times. They were allowed to print them as a publisher, and they weren't arrested or harmed because of that. WikiLeaks in our digital age is kind of a publisher.
Yep.
And this Julian Assange guy has been extradited from the embassy where he's been in prison basically all of these years. I don't know what's going to happen with that guy. Do you view him as a comrade in arms from a journalism perspective? Is he a journalist, do you think?
Well, I think that it's pretty chilling when we punish someone for trying to expose the truth. And I'm no fan of Julian Assange as a tactician, right? I don't think he's doing great work out there in terms of the way he handles things, the way he approaches things. But I do think that he is that I don't like the precedent of jailing somebody for releasing information that the government wants secret. That's the whole purpose of journalism, right? Is to release information to allow the public to know what's happening.
Well, what he's in the biggest trouble for right now is somebody, although he would claim it wasn't him, hacked the email accounts of John Podesta and released that stuff on Hillary Clinton, and I don't know.
Yep, I know.
But Robert McNamara probably would have said the same thing about the Pentagon Papers, and I don't know. That's kind of the way that I look at it. And Chelsea Manning just got out of prison again. They throw her in solitary confinement, and the government's unhappiness with her goes clear back to the first Gulf War because she stole stuff that made some people look really bad in the military. Made them look like war criminals because of video.
I think we need to be protecting whistleblowers whenever we can.
Yeah.
That we as a country want to be in an environment where people who express dissent or who share information that isn't wanted shared are not thrown in jail, because that's not who we are as a country.
Yeah, and if it's a jump ball, if you don't know what, always err on the side of disclosure.
Mm-hmm. Access, freedom.
I mean, that's the way
Sunshine.
I look at it. Yeah. Now, you don't want to you got to be careful with state secrets and ship movements, and you don't want to get people killed that are working undercover and stuff like that. Okay, I get that. I mean, there's got to be some common sense with it. But all right, so that's the way I look at it.
It's a public interest issue, I think.
Yeah, we digress, but it's fascinating stuff to be able to work with you on that. So, your two main gigs kind of end about the same time. The term is about ready to end here at Drake University. The State House has adjourned for the session, but there's work to be done in the summer months too.
Yeah, I teach online, so I'll teach some courses this summer. I'll do some planning for the fall, and then I have legislative, conversations and events and community events all the time. So, I still have both jobs. They just look a little different in the summer.
Yeah. You have to make plans to start campaigning? Yeah.
I'm raising money.
Yeah.
I want to run again because I want to be in the majority, and I want to see if we can really do some of the things that voters tell us they want. And so I'm running again for sure, and I want to help flip the House. So, we've got 4 seats to flip.
So that's definitely within reach.
Yes, we flipped 5 in 18.
Yeah, the Senate.
No, the Senate's just going to be a little longer haul, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll stay tuned for. I was just at a meeting not too long ago, and I talked about the fact that the good news is, well, the bad news is Donald Trump is who he is. I think the Russiagate thing may actually, God, work to his benefit to a certain extent. But incumbent presidents, almost all, are reelected. So and the Electoral College hasn't changed, and all of that stuff's in his favor. Now, that said, the thing that the Democrats really have some hope for is that off-season election, the 2018 election. The little pockets that I mentioned earlier that Hillary Clinton couldn't carry that led to her demise, basically, flipped back blue. Mm-hmm. So those people have either seen the error of their ways, let's hope, or people like you, younger, women, people of color, people more progressive perhaps, ran in those districts instead of the old line Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, that they wouldn't support, and they voted for him.
Yeah. I think that, one of the most startling and hopeful statistics for me is that nationally, Obama-Trump voters, so voters who voted for Obama twice, then Trump last time, had a Trump approval rating at the beginning of his term of something like 55%. And now he's way underwater at like 19% with those voters.
How big a group is that?
I don't know. I don't know, and I'm spouting off, but
Obama-Trump people,
big enough to pull, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people who maybe didn't want Hillary in 2008 who then, or it could be labor, could be, blue collar workers from steel mills in Pennsylvania, Ohio,
And basically what that was, those were people that waited through 8 years of Obama, didn't see the improvement in their lives in those little pockets that they wanted to see, so they wanted to blow it up, voted for Trump. But now they're suffering even more
or
because of the terrorists
Hillary.
and things and they're saying, oh my God, let's come back in the
hope.
fold.
Well, that's the plan.
Hope,
that's the plan. Point those things out to them.
Yeah. So before we leave, one last thing: presidential candidates.
Yeah.
You have a favorite yet?
I do.
Oh, you do? Okay, tell us now.
I've endorsed Cory Booker.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yep. And so I think that we have so many great candidates that it is a joy to be able to select someone I'm for instead of being against other people. It's just a joy. I mean, honestly, if Cory Booker is not the nominee, then whoever is, I will be behind because it's too important, but also because these are some great people.
Yeah.
But with all the people out there, I just felt like Cory Booker is the one who understands most closely what Iowans need in terms of getting our political system back under Democratic control and making sure some of these issues are addressed. But also he has that perfect mix of fight and hope. He's a tough guy. He's scrappy. I don't know if you've seen Street Fight, but it's a good doc.
Yeah.
And then he also has hope, and it's sincere, and it's who he is.
I mean, and he's my God, is he smart?
Oh yeah.
I mean, this guy is really. I mean, I had him on the podcast, and he's very lingual. He's very the guy's like a word game person. I mean, he does all these puns, and he's really quick witted when you talk to him. I mean, he was kind of joking with me, and I wasn't picking up what he was putting down because he's so fast, and. That thing about saving the woman from the burning building, he's got that urban background. He still lives in that neighborhood. He's got that demographic that he can appeal to out there, which is all important. But, and you're a good litmus test for this. You're endorsing him. Some people say, can he make that work? Can he get that across in the heartland? People,
yeah. I mean, who knows? But he's all in on Iowa. So he's spending a lot of time here, talking to a lot of voters. He's got a lot of family here.
Yeah.
Here. And so I think absolutely he can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's great. Well, if you haven't checked out that podcast, do it.
I will, yeah.
I had him on there a couple of times. I'm a little bit from his presentation down in Indianola and then up in Story County.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of history with the Indianola presentation. I don't know if I got that on the podcast or not, but like you said, his family's from here. And he delineates that, and I mean that's just a great thing. Well, I got no problem with that at all. I'm there with you. So Cory Booker, and he's also on the progressive side of things. He's he got a little criticism about accepting some pharma money or something or whatever. But God, I've told people, and I just did that on the Amy Klobuchar piece that I put up. This whack a skeleton thing, we got to get past that. I mean, pick somebody that you like and get on board and support the candidate and get this Trump guy out of there, and don't be whacking skeletons from 30 years ago or something that just isn't that important. I mean, look at the important issues and roll with it. So
yes, Steinbeck said, now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And I think if we make perfect the enemy of the great here, we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
That's great. Well, that's a great way to end it. Let's quote John. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I know where he would be on this.
Exactly.
He would not be a Trump supporter.
That's for sure.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, thanks again, Jennifer Konfrst in her office at Drake University, state legislator for the western suburbs of Des Moines. The district, again, is
43.
43.
Yep.
And she's going to be back at it next year, and she'll be out campaigning, and any and all support that you can give her would be great because she's a friend of ours. And so let's wrap it up and invite you to check out the podcast on Facebook. Do it on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. Follow us there and do the same thing. Just click the little notification bell on YouTube or whatever and check us out here as we move through the campaign season. We'll come back very soon. But for right now, that's another podcast by George.